2 days of turmoil. Tension remains high between the United States and Iran following an attack on an embassy in Baghdad. We have a report and reaction. Dropping out, an update on the 2020 presidential race, including which candidate says he no longer is running for the White House. The Pope's message. The Holy Father says the new year is a time for hope and peace. We'll explain. And still going, why this Christmas season is far from over in Spain and parts of Latin America. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, January 2nd, 2020. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and Happy New Year. Thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Jason Calvi. The U.S. Defense Secretary says Iran may be planning more attacks on American interests. President Trump already blames the country for violent protests outside the U.S. Embassy in Iraq, and he's sending more American troops to the Middle East. Protesters pull out. They're leaving the area surrounding the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad after days of destructive attacks. Before the new year, they started burning tires and torching parts of the American embassy. President Trump called in reinforcements. He dispatched more U.S. troops to secure the U.S. compound, while Apache helicopters flew over in a show of force.
Well, I think it's been handled very well. The Marines came in. We had some great warriors come in and do a fantastic job, and they were there instantaneously.
U.S. airstrikes on an Iranian-backed militia group in Iraq sparked the protests against America. President Trump blames Iran, earlier tweeting, "Iran will be held fully responsible for lives lost or damage incurred at any of our facilities. They will pay a very big price. This is not a warning, it is a threat." Iran's supreme leader reportedly denies any involvement in the attack on the U.S. Embassy in Iraq.
This is not going to get resolved quickly because of the fact that the United States is pursuing this maximum pressure campaign, and Iran is also engaging in its own types of signaling by pushing back.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo canceled a work trip to Ukraine and 4 other countries. The State Department says he's concentrating on the crisis.
The President and the Secretary worked very closely with the Iraqi government. Their security forces have taken all the necessary measures to disperse the crowd there so that we're not facing an imminent threat.
Joining me now with his analysis of the situation is Matthew R.J. Brodsky. He's senior fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. So Pentagon officials warned that the U.S. is ready to send even more troops. They're sending troops to protect the embassy in Iraq. What does this say about American confidence in the Iraqi government?
I think it says less about the Iraqi government as much as it says about Iran's activities over the past year to 2 years, which have really been increasing, targeting America and our allies. And that's the reason for there to be more soldiers that are American going in there. And also it has to do with Iraq, which is thoroughly penetrated on a government level by Iran.
And what does this attack, what does this weekend, these protests signal about Iran's influence in Iraq then?
Well, Iran, and to a very large extent, is a puppet master of a lot of the politicians there, but also of paramilitary groups. So they have parallel structures on the outside with security forces and politicians that they control. We've, of course, seen the same talking points used by all of them, all directed by Iran over the past few days.
Wow. And then so what does this, what's going on with the group that the Trump administration says is behind this? And is that, do you believe that that group is responsible here?
Yes, the group is responsible. It's Kataib al-Hezbollah, but there are other paramilitary groups, Asaib al-Haq, there's Hezbollah al-Nujaba. These are all different group names, and you can call them whatever you want, but the fact is they're run and directed and controlled by Qassem Soleimani. He is the head of the IRGC Quds Force from Iran, an arch terrorist on par with, frankly, a bin Laden level kind of terrorist that we need to be focused on getting. So these types of terrorists are absolutely active, and they're frankly represented in the Iraqi government.
Wow, and what's the message that these people are trying to send? I mean, by protesting, by storming the American embassy. I mean, what does that signal?
Well, our policy from the U.S. side has been actually quite effective against Iran. It has led to protest movements throughout the Middle East, of course, in Iran itself. In Iraq, there have been protests since October against the corruption of politicians and against the perceived Iranian influence there. Iran is trying to use this event to shift the narrative so that it seems as though the Iraqis are protesting what America is doing, and that's in fact not the case. Luckily, Iraqis aren't falling for it. People around the region this time aren't falling for it.
Some critics of the Trump administration say that their maximum pressure on Iran, that whole campaign this is showing that campaign is not successful. Your thoughts on that?
This is actually shows the opposite. It's working, and these are acts of desperation. When you're doing something that's effective, Iran is trying to reach out and strike out. Unfortunately, what they're doing is really harming many other countries and people. The people of the region, of course, see this and understand this, which is why their anger is directed at Iran, not the United States.
Is this the end of the protests? Is this the end of sort of the violence that we've seen there?
It's a faucet, frankly, that Iran can turn on or off. The pictures we've seen from the storming of the embassy featured these terrorist leaders and politicians. They were there on purpose. Iran can make it stop. Iran can make it start.
Okay, well, we're watching that, and hopefully you'll come back and tell us more about that as this story progresses. Matthew R.J. Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you.
And Republican Senator Susan Collins says she's open to having witnesses at the Senate's impeachment trial. She criticizes Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He vowed for total coordination with the White House.
Congress is still on its holiday recess. The House returns next Tuesday, January 7th. That's the earliest time when Speaker Pelosi would send the articles of impeachment to the Senate, almost 3 weeks after the House passed them.
Article 1 is adopted.
If she acts next week, it would kickstart the Senate trial to begin the following day, January 8th, unless and until Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Minority Leader Chuck Schumer announce a different plan. So far, they have not reached an agreement. The Republican leader says he'll work with the White House. Some senators in his party object.
There are senators on both sides of the aisle who, to me, are not giving the appearance of and the reality of judging this in an impartial way.
Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska said last week she was disturbed by McConnell's comments. A majority of the Senate GOP say a trial will be over and done with soon, finding the president not guilty. Senator Lindsey Graham tweets, "The impeachment articles passed by the House of Representatives will meet a quick demise in the Senate, at least until next time."
There is no limit on the number of times the Senate can vote to convict or not a president, no limit to the number of times the House can vote to impeach or not a president.
Another Democrat ends his run for president. Julian Castro didn't gather enough donations to make recent Democratic presidential debates. Polls showed him about 1% of Democrats backing him, and Castro had focused on immigration issues. He had been mayor of San Antonio and housing secretary under President Obama. While Castro's out, other presidential candidates raised large amounts of money in the last 3 months of 2019. Bernie Sanders says he raised more than $34 million last quarter. The numbers show the Vermont senator has not been slowed down by a recent heart attack. Businessman Andrew Yang says he collected more than $16 million, but President Trump beat them. His campaign says it raised more than $46 million in the fourth quarter, and Trump has more than $100 million overall. Turkey's lawmakers authorized sending troops to Libya. The soldiers will support the UN-backed government. Rival forces are trying to capture the country's capital. The fighting has plunged Libya into violent chaos. Hong Kong police pepper spray a lawmaker. It happened during a protest earlier this week. Police say they arrested 400 people. Security officials also say they were using the minimum force needed. Pope Francis joins the funeral of Cardinal Prosper Grech. The theologian was born on the island of Malta. He entered the Augustinian order and studied at both Oxford and Cambridge. He later served as an expert for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Pope Benedict named him a cardinal in 2012. Cardinal Grech died earlier this week at age 94. Pope Francis apologizes for hitting the hand of a pilgrim. She had yanked the Pope's arm.
Le chiedo scusa per il cattivo esempio di ieri.
The Pope was meeting pilgrims on New Year's Eve in St. Peter's Square. It's then, right here, a woman grabbed the Pope's hand. He slapped her hand and then walked away. The next day at his New Year's greeting, Pope Francis apologized. He said, "Love makes us patient, but many times we lose our patience, including myself." We're joined by Andrea Gagliarducci, Vatican analyst for EWTN News. This video has gone viral, so what's the reaction there in Rome?
Well, it can be strange, but there are not so many reactions in Rome because it can happen that the Pope is in the midst of the crowd and something like that happens. I mean, Pope Francis never wanted a strong security around him. He always asked the security to be let loose, to be among people. So this is what happened. The security was kind of loose, and so this woman could grab his arm. We don't know what this woman wanted to say to the Pope, but the Pope was kind of how can I say, concerned, and so he reacted that way, and then he apologized the day after during the Angelus.
Okay, and this was the Pope's message for the new year, and he also had a message for the World Day of Peace. What was that?
Well, yes, the Pope ends the year with two celebrations, the Te Deum on the last day of the year and the Mass on the first day of the new year. That is the Mass that is on the World Day of Peace. The World Day of Peace as a message delivered by popes since Paul VI. The message for this year as a topic, peace as a path of hope, and Pope Francis just condemned every war as fratricidal, as a break in the fraternity that is a vocation of humanity.
And Pope Francis also spoke of possible trips. What can we expect here in 2020?
Well, we know that Pope Francis wants to go to Iraq and to South Sudan. This is something Pope Francis spoke about many times. He also sent a message to South Sudan leaders for Christmas, which was kind of unusual, along with Anglican primate Archbishop Welby and the former moderator of the Methodist Church, Chalmers, because he wants to go there with them. So we'll see if he's going there. Then there are possibilities that the Pope will go to Asia with a trip to Indonesia and East Timor. This is something the Pope spoke about informally sometimes. Then the Pope also spoke about a possible trip to Papua New Guinea. And then there is the possibility the Pope will go back to the Balkans, to Montenegro. During the last audience he gave to the Montenegrin Prime Minister, he said yes to a possible trip over there.
Sounds like a really busy year. What else can we expect this year?
Well, we are expecting two major documents in the first semester of 2020. The first document is the post-synod exhortation of the Pan-Amazonian Synod. We will see how Pope Francis will sort out all the controversies of the Synod, and also what is the shape he wants to give to this post-synod exhortation, what is the shape he wants to give to the Amazonian Church as well. And then there is the draft of the Curia reform that should be out within the first 6 months, we hope. This reform has been under discussion for 7 years. We just can glance to some of the new things in some reforms Pope Francis already performed until now, but we'll see in the next semester.
And you'll be following all of it. Andrea Gagliarducci, Vatican analyst for EWTN News. Thanks.
Thank you.
Coming up, an update on one state's attempt to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment and what it means in the fight for the unborn. Virginia Democrats pledged to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. If so, it would become the 38th state to pass it and might make the long-delayed proposal part of the U.S. Constitution. Supporters say the proposal would create gender equality, but on the national level, there is a long way before it could enter the Constitution. The ERA faces a host of legal challenges. Opponents say it would strengthen abortion and same-sex marriage. Joining us now is Melanie Israel. She's with the Heritage Foundation's DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society. Melanie, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
So this proposal was originally proposed in 1972. What's taken so long?
Well, it takes a little bit of time for state legislatures to ratify this amendment, and a certain number, of course, have to ratify it in order for it to go into effect. And Congress attached a time limit to this proposal. And that time limit, that deadline, has long since come and gone. But recently, some states have been trying to revive this proposal, basically saying that that deadline no longer applies, that Congress can retroactively say that there isn't a deadline, kind of some novel theories going on here, but essentially they're trying to bring it back from the dead.
And it comes down to Virginia, right? Virginia's flipped from Republican control to Democratic control, and that's the key state that would put it over the threshold of the past numbers that would require.
Right, in theory, and there's some disagreements too. Some states had ratified it, and then they turned around and essentially unratified it. And so there would be a lot to figure out through the court system of whether or not that threshold has been met, whether or not this deadline can actually be retroactively suspended. So even if Virginia were to pass this, it is by no means a slam dunk.
So one of the key issues I've been hearing from pro-life groups is they're really concerned about this. What would this equal rights amendment do for the pro-life cause?
It's essentially been called the everything related to abortion amendment, because that's what it is. And I want to be very clear that this is not a hypothetical concern. We've actually seen this happen in states like New Mexico and Connecticut that have a state level equal rights amendment. What abortion rights activists then came in and said is that if you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, then that means women must have complete, total, unfettered access to abortion, that people have the right to taxpayer-funded abortion. And so in those states, it is the Equal Rights Amendment at the state level that opened the door to all of that. So this is by no means a hypothetical concern. It would open the door to abortion far beyond the limits of even Roe versus Wade.
So besides abortion, what about marriage? What about religious freedom? Would this have any impact on those issues?
Oh my goodness, it would have a huge impact. We've already seen in recent years, activists and courts have tried to look at existing civil rights law that bans discrimination on the basis of sex. And of course, Congress at that time meant biological sex. Activists have now come in to say, no, they actually mean gender identity, which is, of course, a person's subjective determination of how they identify. It has nothing to do with that person's biological reality. And so this is then being used not as a shield to protect people from discrimination, but as a sword to attack people who do believe that biological sex is a reality and that it matters. And so that has had far-reaching implications all over the place with bakers and florists. We've seen this already playing out at the Supreme Court with girls and women's privacy and safety in facilities like locker rooms, showers, prisons, women's shelters, when we essentially say that sex matters, but anybody can identify as any sex that they want. It flips all of these protections on their head and really creates a lot of challenges for the people that these laws are purporting to protect.
Okay, Melanie Israel, Research Associate at the DeVos Center at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
A German cardinal says the U.S. church crisis is man-made. Cardinal Gerhard Mueller also says the struggles come from a spirit of trying to live a life without God and without Catholic beliefs. The cardinal spoke in Arizona at a summit hosted by Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. Up next, advice for the faithful on how to make and keep effective New Year's resolutions, and how the faithful in Spain are preparing for a big feast next Monday. This new year brings with it a chance for a fresh start. And New Year's resolutions, that often includes goals like exercise. And what about spiritual exercises? Let's talk about that with Father Jeffrey Kirby, pastor of Our Lady of Grace Parish in Indian Land, South Carolina. He's also adjunct professor of theology at Belmont Abbey College. Father, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So what can we make of this spiritually, looking at the new year?
Yeah, so I think probably there has to be two movements. So first, we should be filled with gratitude. So look at 2019 and ask ourselves and identify, even if there was hardship and suffering, what in the midst of 2019 can we be grateful for? And I think that has to be our first start, is one of thanksgiving, gratitude. And then from there to maybe identify some areas where, maybe some areas of weakness or growth that were needed, or maybe some sufferings that we could have prevented by moral decisions or other things of that sort. And then bring those into 2020 with greater wisdom. So maybe some resolutions in terms of our spiritual life, our moral life, family life, and these various areas. So I think we start with Thanksgiving, and then we move to this type of resolution for amendment. So
it's interesting because the church in her wisdom provides indulgences on New Year's Eve if you do the Te Deum, which is an ancient prayer of thanksgiving. And also in the New Year, the day of the New Year's Day, praying the Veni Creator Spiritus, come Holy Spirit. So the church is saying, hey, look back on your year and be thankful at the end of the year and look forward, asking the Holy Spirit to guide that into the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that as we move into 2020, we can ask ourselves, especially in terms of our relationship with God, what are some areas that we can work on? Some of the things that I recommend to my parishioners, I recommend any Catholic, first, regular and frequent confessions, even monthly. Like, go. I mean, this is a fount of mercy. Like, go. And people say, well, I don't commit mortal sins that often, Father. It's like, well, you can go and confess venial sins and receive that grace in order to be strengthened for even higher and more creative virtue. So I think that's very important. Monthly confessions, huge. Secondly is read the Bible. You know, I tell people, they say, well, I don't really know where to start and so on. So look, there are 31 Proverbs in the Old Testament. There are 31 days in a full month. Read the proverb of the day. So whatever today is, January so-and-so, go and look at that proverb and read that. It'll take you 2 minutes, far better than any fortune cookie at an Asian restaurant. Right? You know what I mean? This is divine wisdom, you know. Bring that into your day. That's an easy way. Or I recommend just 5 minutes of prayer. Just 5. Especially if someone has no prayer life, just start with 5 minutes. 5 minutes of spontaneous prayer and just offer that to the Lord. Those are some basic, simple ideas that I throw out frequently, especially at the new year, because it is a new year. It's a new beginning. It's a fresh start.
Yeah,
you know?
it is.
And especially if you match that with the sacrament of reconciliation, God gives that eternal new beginnings. So we can say, what have I done and what do I want to do? What have I been and who do I want to be? And we have the grace in Jesus Christ to make that change. So I think resolutions can be very important.
So we have this chance, beginning of the year, to set these resolutions. Maybe we haven't set them yet, but now might be a good opportunity because of your Father talking with us and saying, you know, hey, go to confession, 5 minutes of prayer, start with that, and then move up and reading those Proverbs, reading the Bible. Yes. Anything else as we begin the year?
Yes, I think that, you know, for those maybe who are more sporadic with their Sunday Mass attendance or who, well, I go every Sunday, but I don't do the Holy Day thing. I want to encourage, you know, into the 2020, like, you know, Mass every Sunday and the holy days of obligation, like, especially our young families. Make this commitment. Don't give yourself the pass, like, especially when you're tired, when there's a lot going on, when there's sporting events or vacations. Make that extra mile because so much more grace can be given, so much more blessing can be bestowed upon that family.
So beautiful. We have a beautiful chapel right behind us in the studio, right behind the studio here. Excellent. So we'll go there. We'll offer a prayer for our listeners tonight and our viewers. And we appreciate you being with us, Father Jeffrey Kirby. Thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it very, very much. Thanks. And finally tonight, Christmas Day and New Year's have come and gone. But in Spain, the Christmas season stays in full swing. The faithful prepare for Epiphany. The feast includes celebrating the visit of the three kings to baby Jesus. There are long lines to purchase lottery tickets for a drawing called El Niño. It's held on Epiphany, January 6th. People in Spain also mark the feast with a traditional king cake. I'm Jason Calvi, and for the entire EWTN News Nightly team, we hope you have a blessed 2020. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.